Isn't it funny how we're all about digital these days, but everyone's going crazy for these paper planners again?
Yeah, it's like we need something we can actually hold, to actually write stuff down.
Right. It's like this whole back to basics thing for getting organized, but there's this weird catch if you're trying to sell those planners, especially if you're importing them.
Sure, that's right.
Yeah, tariffs. Who knew they'd be such a big deal for paper planners?
Yeah, you wouldn't think it, would you? I mean, it seems like a pretty straightforward business, right?
Mhm.
Bring in something people obviously want, but then these import taxes come in and things get, well, messy.
And for anyone listening who's in the planner business already or thinking about jumping in, figuring out this whole tariff thing is crucial.
Oh, absolutely, especially if you want to actually make a profit, right?
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're going to break down exactly that. How do you deal with these tariffs when you're importing paper planners? Even better, can you actually find ways to lower your costs and actually make more money despite them?
Think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet for staying ahead of the game in the planner world.
Okay, so first things first, let's talk tariffs. What are they exactly?
Well, in the simplest terms, they're taxes. A country puts them on goods that are coming in from other countries.
Like a way to make those imported goods more expensive.
Exactly. It's often done to protect industries within that country, make sure their own products can compete.
Okay, so when we're talking about paper planners specifically, how much can these tariffs actually add to the cost?
Well, that's the thing. They can be pretty significant. The research we're looking at today suggests potential increases anywhere from 10% to a whopping 25%.
Whoa, wait, 25%. That's not just like a little extra fee.
No, it can be a pretty substantial chunk of change. The article we're looking at even lays out this scenario where a 25% tariff on paper, just the paper itself, could cut a retailer's profit margin by 15%.
Ouch. So you either make a lot less money or you have to raise your prices, and then people might not buy your planners.
Exactly. It puts businesses in a really difficult spot. And the thing about paper planners is, well, it's not like you're just importing one single thing.
Right, there's the paper, the covers, the binding, all that stuff.
Yeah, the supply chains can get really complex. Like you might get your paper from one country, your cover materials from another, then it all gets printed and put together somewhere else entirely.
So you could be dealing with multiple different tariffs along the way.
Exactly. The article points out that each of these components, the paper, the covers, the binding, they could all have their own separate tariff rates.
So figuring out your final cost can be a real nightmare.
A bit of a headache, for sure. And just the tariffs on raw materials, like the paper itself, can range from 10 to 25%. And to make things even more unpredictable, these tariff policies can change, sometimes pretty suddenly.
So you could be hit with these surprise cost increases out of nowhere.
Yeah, it makes it hard to plan,
Yeah.
And then on top of everything else, you've got currency fluctuations to think about.
Yeah.
Like if the value of the dollar changes, that can really throw a wrench in your budget, make it really tough to set stable prices for your customers.
So we're talking about a whole web of logistical and financial challenges, right?
Exactly.
And it sounds like these tariffs can actually have a ripple effect on the whole economy, not just businesses importing planners.
Oh, absolutely. Like if prices go up because of tariffs, people might buy fewer paper products altogether. The article mentions a study that found even a 10% price increase could cause a 20% drop in demand for paper-based stuff.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. And it means that businesses that don't adapt to this, to these tariff challenges, they risk falling behind. Competitors who can keep their costs down, they're the ones who are going to win out.
Right. If that planner I always buy suddenly costs, way more, I might just decide to use my phone calendar or something. So let's get to the good stuff. How do businesses actually deal with this whole tariff situation? The article talks about some specific strategies, right?
It does. And the first one is all about diversifying your supply chain.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Getting your supplies from different places.
Basically, yeah. The idea is that by not relying on just one country for all your materials or your manufacturing, you're less vulnerable to sudden tariff hikes from any one place.
So if one country raises their tariffs a bunch, you have other options.
Exactly. It spreads out your risk and gives you more control over your costs in the long run.
And there's that company, Line Paper, that the article uses as an example, right?
Right. Line Paper is interesting. They have these two main production centers, one in China and one in Cambodia. And what's smart about this is each location kind of specializes in different things. So the China factory, they're all about really high-end printing, those fancy binding techniques, highly customized stuff.
So if you want like a really fancy planner, that's where you go.
Exactly. But then their factory in Cambodia, that offers something else that's really important, especially for businesses importing to the U.S.
What's that?
Well, for one, lower labor costs. But even bigger than that, tariff-free exports to the U.S. because Cambodia is part of this thing called the Generalized System of Preferences, or GSP.
So under this GSP thing, certain goods from Cambodia can come into the U.S. without those big tariffs?
Exactly. It's a pretty sweet deal. And the article gives this example of a U.S. retailer who was hit with like a 20% tariff increase on planners they were bringing in from China. By switching their production over to Lion Paper's factory in Cambodia, they managed to cut their costs by 18%.
Wow. So they basically saved a ton of money and didn't have to raise their prices for customers.
Right, a win-win situation.
Okay, so that's strategy number one. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, sourcing-wise. What's the next tactic for tackling these tariffs?
Strategy number 2 is all about taking advantage of trade agreements.
Like deals between countries?
Yeah, basically. These agreements, they set the terms for how countries trade with each other, and a lot of times they include provisions that can lower or even completely eliminate tariffs on certain types of goods.
And I think the article mentioned the USMCA, right?
Right, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Under that agreement, some paper products can actually qualify for a 0% tariff rate.
So no tariff at all.
None. Now, the details of these agreements can get kind of complicated. That's where having a good global sourcing network like what Lion Paper offers can be really helpful. They can help you figure out like which trade agreements apply to your products, which ones give you the best rates and all that.
It sounds like you almost need to be a lawyer to understand all this stuff.
You don't need to be a lawyer, but it definitely helps to have someone in your corner who knows the ropes. And the article also talks about this other interesting tactic, reclassifying your imports.
Reclassifying, I don't get it.
Okay, so sometimes by slightly tweaking how your product is categorized for customs purposes, you might be able to fit it into a different tariff category.
Oh, I see. One that has a lower tariff rate.
Exactly. There's this example in the article of a brand that worked with Lion Paper to reclassify their planner covers. Like, they didn't actually change the design or the quality of the covers at all, but just by changing how they were classified, they saved 15% on import duties.
That's kind of brilliant. Okay, so we've got diversifying your suppliers, taking advantage of trade agreements. What's strategy number 3?
Strategy number 3 involves something called duty drawback programs. It might sound a little technical, but it can be a really powerful way to get some of your tariff money back if your business qualifies.
Duty drawback, I've never even heard of that. What is it?
Okay, so basically, these programs let businesses who import goods then do something to them, like customize them or process them further, and then export those products. They can actually get a refund on the tariffs they originally paid on those imported materials.
So like if you import planner parts, assemble them into finished planners, and then sell those planners to other countries, you might be able to get some of that tariff money back.
Exactly. So if you're a business that sells internationally, these duty drawback programs can be a real game changer.
Okay, so if someone's thinking about using these programs, what do they need to do?
Well, the article lays out a few key steps. First, you got to figure out if your specific imports even qualify for these duty refunds. Then you have to be super organized, keep detailed records of all the tariffs you've paid on everything. And then comes the fun part, filing those claims.
Which I'm guessing can get pretty complicated.
It can be. A lot of businesses end up working with trade specialists who really know the ins and outs of all these programs. The article also recommends finding partners, like Lion Paper, who can guide you through all the compliance stuff and help you make sure you're doing everything right.
And they give an example of a wholesaler who used this successfully, right?
Yeah, a wholesaler who sells customized planners all over the world. They worked with Lion Paper to set up a duty drawback system, and they ended up getting thousands of dollars in import duties refunded.
That's a lot of money. Okay, so that's 3 strategies down. What's the final piece of the puzzle when it comes to dealing with these tariffs?
Okay, strategy number 4 is all about optimizing your inventory and logistics.
Okay, so that's about like where you store your products and how you ship them, right?
Right, exactly. And it can actually play a big role in how much you end up paying in tariffs, not to mention how smoothly your whole business runs.
So how does that actually work?
Well, one really important tactic is using bonded warehouses.
What are those?
Basically, they're these special storage facilities where you can keep imported goods without actually having to pay the tariffs on them right away. You only pay when the goods are sold and taken out of the warehouse.
So it's like delaying the tariff payment until you actually have the money from selling the products.
Exactly. It could be a huge help for your cash flow. And this is another area where having a global supply chain network, like Lion Paper has, can be a big advantage. They can help you store large quantities of inventory in these tariff-free zones, then ship out smaller batches as needed so you're not paying unnecessary fees. They can also help you optimize your whole logistics operation, use fulfillment centers strategically, all that good stuff to keep your overall transportation costs down.
It sounds like there's a lot of strategy involved in just moving these planners around. And I think the article mentioned an Amazon seller who was doing this, right?
Yeah, they were working with Lion Paper's factory in Cambodia, and by using the strategy of delaying the tariff payments until the planners were actually sold, they saved something like 90 cents per planner in storage and import costs.
90 cents per planner, that doesn't sound like much, but if you're selling a lot of planners.
It adds up,
Mm.
especially when you're competing with other businesses. Every little bit of savings counts.
Big time. Okay, so it sounds like dealing with tariffs, while it can seem super intimidating, it's not an impossible situation. There are things businesses can actually do to manage it.
Right, and the main takeaway here is it doesn't have to be this huge obstacle. By using a combination of these strategies, diversifying your supply chain, really understanding those trade agreements, taking advantage of duty drawback programs, and optimizing your whole inventory and logistics operation, you can really protect your profits, maybe even increase them.
And it seems like a company like Lion Paper, with their 2 factories and their expertise and all this stuff, it can be a really valuable partner.
Absolutely. That dual factory setup that gives businesses flexibility, they can choose the best option for their needs, whether they're prioritizing top-of-the-line production or those tariff-free imports. And they have like a whole team of experts who can guide you through all the confusing tariff and trade agreement stuff. Plus, they offer like this whole end-to-end supply chain solution. From manufacturing to warehousing to shipping, they handle everything.
Okay, so for anyone listening, let's do a quick recap. The key strategies for managing your costs when you're importing paper planners. Diversify where you get your supplies from. Don't rely on just one country. Look into those trade agreements. See if any of them can help you lower or get rid of those tariffs. Investigate those duty drawback programs. See if you qualify. And get smart about your logistics. Think about where you're storing your products and how you're shipping them.
And understanding all this stuff, it's not just about saving money in the short term. It's about gaining a real advantage in this global market we're all operating in. Businesses that are flexible, that can keep their costs down, they're the ones that are going to succeed.
Awesome. So for everyone listening, we've just done this deep dive into how tariffs affect the whole paper planner importing business. We've gone through 4 major strategies to help you deal with those challenges. Diversifying your supply chain, taking advantage of trade agreements, utilizing those duty drawback programs, and getting really strategic with your inventory and logistics.
And as you're thinking about all this information, here's a thought. What if you just picked one of these strategies and actually started using it? Like right now.
You might be surprised by how big of a difference it could make to your bottom line.
Exactly.
So now's the time to think about your own business, your own situation, and ask yourself, which of these strategies makes the most sense for me right now? Which one's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? In this whole world of paper planners and getting organized, things are changing all the time, so you got to stay ahead of the game.
Definitely something to ponder.